AI and ID and compliance. Thank you for joining. Now, let's get on this journey together as we talk around the intersection of AI, identity, and compliance in this digital world. Welcome, everyone. And I'm not going to be doing this alone. I have, a panelist, a guest with me, and we're going to be having short introductions. Would have like a minute each for each of the panelists to introduce themselves.
My name is Niyi Adegboye. I'm co-founder here at Prembly. I'm also a member of Forbes Technology Council.
Great. Thank you very much, Tony, for that good run through of what we should perhaps look to get into today. My name is Brian Odongo. For those of you who may struggle with the pronunciation of my second name, it's there on your screen, Odongo. I'm an advocate lawyer based in Nairobi at the firm of Kiptines and Odongo Associates, or KO Associates. We are a full service law firm, a full corporate commercial service law firm, but with a very strong background in technology, media, and telecommunications, which is sort of the DNA of the firm. That is a background with which we grew over the years. And without saying a bit more, I think we've had a strong partnership for a long time with Prembly now, and looking forward to the wonderful conversation that we're going to have. But most importantly, I think looking forward to the engagement that we receive, because I think most of us on the call today are industry players in one form or the other. And I think it will be quite an enriching conversation just to hear what our experience has been. Of course, from our perspective, we really just will be looking to double down and bring our experience from our interaction with regulators. And thanks, Tony. I think that should be it. I try to keep it in a minute.
My name is Kingsley Owadara. I have a background in law. I'm a lawyer. And most especially, I am an AI ethicist and also the founder of Pan-Africa Center for AI Ethics. At the core of my work is to ensure that the building, the development, deployment, and the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning tools, are done the right way. I mean, that's just a summary of everything that I do. So from the regulation to the policy to frameworks, a bit of infrastructure here and there. Yeah, so that's what I do.
Again, welcome everyone. If you're just joining, this session is on AI, artificial intelligence, identity, and compliance. And we're going to be looking at the future of privacy, security, and regulation in this digital world. So AI is thing, and I would like the speakers, the panelists today, to share some thoughts about how the AI is transforming our world currently. Modern economy, and everything around us in this real time. So Brian will go first, and then Kingsley. How do you think AI is transforming our world as we see it, or as we live in currently?
Yeah, I mean, a very interesting question that you asked, and I think I'll start to look at it from a problem perspective beyond anything else. First of all, I think the first and foremost, of course, is the big challenge that regulators are having in terms of just catching up with what the industry is already doing. As Kingsley, of course, will tell you, oftentimes the biggest problem with regulation is that the law tends to follow the event. And with that is often the challenge of the fact that either the law then comes to stifle what already is out there, or then is unable to effectively regulate. I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, in Kenya right now, we only just have our national AI strategy, which is being rolled out. That is coming with the backdrop of us already having had a very robust national ICT policy, which in itself already had, very broad descriptions of what, as a country, the direction that as a country wanted to take from a broad technology perspective. And so seeing the AI evolution, becoming common stay, I think the last 2 years, more than anything else, I don't think there's been a buzzword more than artificial intelligence. And this year, even more with the shifting, global political environment. I think that has been a big thing. So I think how it's shifting our world, of course, we are seeing that playing out very strongly now from a perspective of government, and government in this sense as a regulatory player within the industry. I think what AI is able to do for us as a human race, there'll be varied answers all across the panel team today, but also with our good friends and colleagues attending on the other front. There can be as much as possible saved from it. So my take, first of all, is what is AI doing for us today? I think AI is putting regulators in a very uncomfortable place where we're not necessarily dealing with a linear product that perhaps you can get a hold of and control in the typical structure that regulators perhaps have been used to to doing in a very long time. So just to juxtapose that for you is having a look, say, at our national ICT policy, which was very clear that when it comes to data, and I'll take a small facet of it, data, that concerns citizens of the Republic of Kenya, they shall not in any way be subjected to automated decision making. That is the take of the national ICT policies, and this is coming from 2006 this way. But then now we're seeing a national AI strategy, which is directly in contradiction of what the national ICT policy had said. So that really exemplifies what AI is doing to the world today. We're having a paradigm shift on how regulators approach a lot of these questions. I think those of us in industry already rolling this out, running with it. I'll give you an example, say in the legal services sector, I think in the last 4 years or so, we already have players who can turn around contracts within a few minutes. To perhaps a 92% accuracy, and maybe some of the nuances in terms of mistakes just being spellings in names, perhaps the system struggling to properly spell Odongo or Owadara or something of the sort. But a lot of change has already been seen. We're already having this. It's not a new thing. I think that's another thing that perhaps a lot of mistakes may have been done. The presumption with the regulators that this is new. It's emerging. I don't think it's new. I don't think it's emerging. It's here already with us. We're already experiencing it. What perhaps we are doing is moving away from large language models into much more refined versions of it. That's my preliminary take on what it's doing for us.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just speak up and I would say that artificial intelligence just recently it became a buzzword, and it's something that's been on for a while before now. I mean, automation isn't something that started last year or 2 years ago. I mean, it's something that's been for years back. The intelligence began to expand lately from research and then penetration into several industry. But artificial intelligence as a tool or as a technology is not something new, and I see it from two sides, like a two-sided coin. The two-sided coin, which is the first side is the good part. That seems, making things easy, economic disruption, making work easier, automating tasks, increasing productivity. And I mean, those are the parts that are really efficient and beneficial to we as human, and we are excited about it. But flipping it to the other side is, people that now take advantage of this tool to amplify, their works. I mean, once a tool gets into the hand of a good person, the person increases goodness, and once the tool gets into the hand of a bad person, the person increases his mischievousness in quotes, and that's exactly how we're seeing it. And because of this, a lot of governments in Africa are bringing up responses to it, looking at it first from the international stage, down to the continental stage and regional stage also, and down to the national level. And I feel that the first approach that governments are doing, first of all, which I feel like the basic approach, is to start with the protection of data, because these tools are actually built on data. And to see it right, every government has a constitution, and one of the fundamental things that we find that is similar in all constitution is the protection of human rights. Part of the human right that you're protecting is right to privacy, and so anything that have the possibilities of invading a constitutional right is seen as a, in quotes, national threat, and I feel that the responses are countries coming up with data protection frameworks, ICT frameworks, some even coming up with cyber security or cyber act, or irrespective of what is being called. But governments are beginning to respond to it these days, with national strategy, national policy. But I see that it's really good. It's really good because we look at it from the bigger picture. The responses from the international community, the OECD, the UNESCO, the G7, the G20, their responses down to the continental, the African continental strategy and all the likes, then down to individual countries' work. I think the approach is getting better, and I am looking at it from African lens right now. I think it's getting better, and I feel that in the coming years, it's getting better. And also in face of the current bill, Nigeria here, the current bill in the National Assembly is proposing that all tech companies have a localized office, in the country. So all these are approaches that governments are making to ensure that we want to have total oversight over these two, which I think might not be totally possible, but at least efforts are being made to ensure that there are oversights and people's rights are safeguarded.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. And like my mind just goes to the recent fine that the courts in Kenya put forward for White Path, right? I think it's a digital lending firm. And then I know that Kenya has been like big on privacy, data privacy, especially with regards to digital lending firms. And I'm just thinking like if I'm talking of these things right now and it's not automated, right? They're not using any automated systems for anything at all. Like if we are to the point where these digital lending firms start actually automating like a lot of things that have to do with them relating to their customers, like it's going to be a whole lot. It will be a whole lot.
When it comes to AI, I think it's no more a story, right? And it's not a fairy tale. We know that AI is here and is here to stay. And I would say, even though it's not new, it's something that has been in existence for some time, but well, in terms of how it's not taking shape, right, and it's transforming every sector. I'll say, if you look at it, AI is going to continue to grow as it is. There's still a lot to actually happen with AI. We'll see how AI is transforming industries from identity management, right, to even sales to aerodynamics everywhere, right? You see how AI is actually playing out. And we can see a lot of open source platforms that are also coming up to just ensure that AI is widely adopted by everybody. I know every company right now, when they are pitching to you, there's going to be an element of AI. We are AI for this, we are AI for that, right? And it's actually a good thing, right? Because AI is supplementing a whole lot of processes. But at the same time, I still think there's still a bit of work to be done, right? Even though as we adopt AI, as we see how it's transforming different industry, there's still work on the part of the innovators. There's still work on part of the government, right? As it is. So I just put it that to that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I think this question would be around, and we mentioned it a bit, but I want us to do probably like a list. And after this, Niyi would step in and handle the next, set of, questions and discussions. But this is to everyone. Niyi first, and then Kingsley, and then Brian. What are the major challenges that stick out for you? And give like an example of that challenge when you're speaking of an AI-driven economy. It can be the challenges as it relates to ID management or data sovereignty or cross-border privacy issues or privacy issues generally. What challenges do you see when we think about and talk about an AI-driven economy? So Niyi, Kingsley, and then Brian.
Right. I think one is, I'll say, the quality of data, right? That's been something that always sort of stood out, right? In every conversation when it comes to AI, right? Because we all know that AI leverage on data as it is, and whatever data you use, right, in training that particular model, right, will determine what you're going to get. And if you're going to fast track back to the days when OpenAI came out, right, there are a lot of criticism around the data, and you also had things around the model is being biased, right? And these are just because of the kind of data that was used in training it, and that sort of remains the same right now. Anybody who is building any form of automation using AI is going to come down to what is the fundamental data, right, that you've used in training this, right? And data integrity is very, very important. And in as much as that is the subject, then how are we ensuring that the kind of data that we're using in training all our model as it relates to AI is, first of all, a very, very clean data. We can attest that the accuracy and integrity of that data is 100%, right, as it is. And then from there, every other thing now starts popping out, right? Even the issue around privacy is still related to data, right? So I'll say the fundamental for me is still on data, right? And that's remains one of the biggest issues that we're facing. If you look at Africa, for example, the reason why maybe you won't have yet a very robust model, or in terms of the old clamoring of AI, is still because we don't have, well, we have data. I won't say we don't have data. We have data, but the form in which those data exist, right? It's not there yet, right? As it is, a typical example is, we know that in everywhere, everybody wants to sort of own data, right? In Nigeria, for example, if I start naming a lot of data silos, right, you'll be wondering that what is really going on. So everybody is still sitting on, oh, this is my data, oh, this is my own data, right? This is my own data. And what that has made is, it makes the data really scarce, right? As it is, even if you go down to private sectors, right? There's no uniformed database where you can go, right? And then you can actually say, I have data that I can use in training my model. But the good news is that some very fantastic people are trying to see how they can harmonize the data. I know it's still a long way to go, but eventually, since it has started, we'll definitely get to a point where we in Africa can also say, yes, we have data that we can now start training models, right? Building efficiencies into what pertains to us, right? As it is. I was at a particular event, and part of the things that's been discussed is still centering around data, and how some of the machines that are built outside, right, cannot really work for us, in Africa. And it's just simply because of the fundamental, which is the data, right? As it is. So hopefully this challenge around data would be overcome, right? We see people who are coming up to say this is the space that they want to play, right? To ensure that efficiency of AI and adoption of AI is something that, yes, we can say out of Africa, we have something that can 100% work for us.
Interesting. We do not. So, Niyi, do you think that open source might be a solution?
Well, I would say it might be, it might be, but there's another question to that, right? Which is still a function of privacy. Are you getting this data, right? Even though we want to put out an open source, that we'll have to start talking about data privacy, right? How you getting all this data, right? Because I'm sure for everybody on this call and on this session, you won't want your data to be accessed in a way that you've not actually authorized it, right? As it is. Imagine having your financial records, right, as part of an open source data, or your health record, right, as part of an open source data, right? It's, even though you might not know, but I'm sure if by chance you are able to find out, then it won't be a funny thing, right? So there are a lot of initiatives. For example, the whole open banking initiative, right? Is a place like Get Started, right? But we can see a lot of back and forth even with the whole initiative of the open banking. I think eventually we'll actually get there, and there are a lot of frameworks, right, that are popping up regarding all this AI thing and AI that and stuff like that. So.
Oh, okay.
That's my take.
Okay, so Kingsley and then Brian. Kingsley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would also pick up from where Niyi stopped on the question of data, but I want to look at it also from the bigger perspective now of the infrastructure and also the protection of the data. It's one thing to have regulations on data protection, protection of personal data. It's another thing to have guidelines on how we could have privacy preserving technology. So, and this is something that happened several times in the country, and most of us were privy to, is questions issues of identity theft. And these days, it is so terrible that there are dark webs where people could actually go to create crazy deepfakes that looks so realistic. And the essence of this would be, the actors, have different motives, different reasons why they are doing this. In fact, there was this recent one that happened where a popular Nigerian celebrity, a particular medicine company, medication company, or call them, went to do a deep fake of him, saying that he had tested or is affirming to the authenticity of their products. So it's a big issue. It's a big issue for deep fakes. So what exactly? Because there are, and that is it on reputation damage. There are also other issues where, and these are part of the recent work that we are doing at the center, trying to understand the implications of AI-generated content, especially in higher institutions where you could see AI-driven pornography. People could literally just have the face picture of somebody, upload it on the website, and then you could have like a full-fledged, pornography of that person, and you could. These things are generating. So I see it as a big issue because yes, we have regulations to hold tight the protection of personal data, but and that's a challenge. How do we ensure that companies that are coming within the Nigerian cyberspace are really holding to it, and how are those companies being blocked? Those dark webs are being blocked. Aside from that, the question of infrastructure, because these days, as Niyi have mentioned, the best way to sell any tool is just to say it's AI driven. You have a pen, tell them that this pen is AI driven. You have a T-shirt, tell them the T-shirt is AI driven, and then you've got people to buy it. So governments also are succumbing to those pressure where they are now putting in AI driven, verification. So if we are having AI driven verification, which is very, very difficult to even use in the first place, how are those systems trained? Because I know that most times can be in the habit of Africa, and I speak as general, where we believe in importing technology, technology that is built in the global south, in the global north, can be like the best and not the one built within the country. So these tools likelihood are not built with the indigenous data of these people. So what are the so that means that if you are bringing up identity verification technology that are not being built within the country, you can imagine what can happen. And these things are deployed from security service, surveillance system, to highways where you are installing speed cameras to detect speed. These are real issues. I refer to even in Lagos here where you find installation of cameras, and once you go once you do any kind of you go at the limit of some speed, you get ticketing. I was with somebody last week, and the person was telling me how she was in her house, she just tried to reverse her car from her house, and she saw a ticket of 20,000. And then she was wondering, like, what happened? I didn't even drive this car out. It was afterwards she went to their office to complain, and they said that the camera covered a compound as part of the coverage. So imagine instance like that. Yeah, so our compound was part of the coverage of the surveillance system, and then she was ticketed because her papers were out. So they were saying that probably it was when she was reversing her car from the gate. And many persons have fallen. This can be minor issue to us. It can be minor issue because it is just 10,000, 20,000 tickets. But what if it is now deployed in very sensitive terrain, such as security, such as sentencing, in judicial system, the court system, such as health sector, such as biometrics, probably in bank, probably you need to verify your ID to enter into the bank's vaults. So which means that if there is a failure in the biometric system, the bank is in jeopardy. So those are the things I find. So availability of training data. I know that there are people that are working on getting this thing solved for Africa. I know about Lalipa, Professor Bossi, and all those people working on it. But countries must because I'm careful not to collapse Africa as a single entity. I'm trying to look at it from country to country perspective this time around. I think country needs to take charge of this and be responsible for this. Just the way, in the days of telco, where the government mandated, telecommunications to have data system in Nigeria. And currently we have about 17 data system, 17 data centers. There are about 17 data centers right here in Nigeria for telcos. I think if we could also make that a serious matter where regulations on cross-border systems can be enforced, that if you want to train on Nigeria data, then you must be resident. There must be clear sovereignty over our data. I mean, that's what I actually refer to as data sovereignty, right? Where you could actually have a say over this training data. And that's where you could, take time to eliminate bias gradually. You might not have 100% system, but at least you could reduce it as those instances, are coming up. So I'll just take a pause here.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. Very, very insightful. I laughed a bit when you talked about the lady that, packed her car again, and then turns out, her compound was covered. And every time, if she hadn't noticed or if she hadn't gone up to them, it means every time she did that, she would most likely be billed, right? Until it gets like something that's totally uncomfortable, and it's in the system, it's in the system that she owes the system. And if this is something that's on criminal records or something like that, it'd be a whole lot for you to have to find a way to ensure that is expunged from the criminal records. That's a whole lot. Brian, thanks for the examples, really apt. Thank you so much. Brian.
Thanks, Tony. I think I'll just jump onto that. And the first that I'll speak about, of course, is from the front of after having deployed. But also this will touch to a great extent on players within the industry. That is to say, people creating products that are AI based. And that, of course, is a very big problem of sifting out bad actors. This will not only be a problem from a regulatory perspective, but has to be something that players in the industry must think about very proactively. And before I speak much about it, let me just first of all give a very brief example of an experience that we had recently in a roundtable set up by Microsoft. So in South Africa, Microsoft sort of on the Azure platform sort of set up an AI-enabled system that sort of works to enable access to justice for people from the low-income areas. And so in the past few months or so, they've gotten up to, if I'm not mistaken, about 98,000 responses, which is pretty good. And impact is measurable. They can actually see instant impact. And so as we're just engaging with this, and now speaking about bad actors from the perspective of users of these services and how as service providers, because I know the bulk of us on this call today are actually service providers in one way or another who are looking to either transition or already are transitioning to AI based models in terms of their operations. And so among the people who are exploiting the benefits of this service was, so it's a bot that ideally you're able to pop Twitter question and ask it. I don't know, my neighbor's dog keeps running into my property. What do I do about it? And so it tries to map out, where are you? Is there a local municipal law that deals with this issue, or is this a national law issue? So on and so forth. Nigeria would be very interesting, where perhaps are we discussing federal law? Are we discussing state law? Then once it picks that out, then it's able to give you responses. But of course, with right now where we currently still are, which I think is another challenge with AI, it still has to defer this by giving you the indication that you may later on want to actually contact a human lawyer for verification of this. But that aside, the challenge then is, as they're going through some of these interactions with the bot, they come across people who ask cheekily very particular questions of saying, I may have stabbed someone. Do I need to get concerned if I did this on this particular street? Sort of trying to prod the bot to give them responses on how far will the law go. Go with this. So that first of all is a very big challenge that we will have to think about as service providers. How do we sift out bad actors? When still on bad actors, I think let's now look at it from the lens of a regulator, where we have the well-meaning service providers who are doing, say, for instance, background checks, KYC, KYB, and you just want this to, be run a lot faster, efficiently at cost, that you can scale it up, and you give responses to your client, at the snap of a finger the next day. Say, we perhaps the only challenge therefore being, system downtime or anything of the sort. But then how then do we shield ourselves? And I think looking at this from the lens of Africa, and here I will generalize Africa as one unit, where we then must be very particular to ensure that our regulators do not let this chance pass away from us, where we actually must keenly look at those who get into these spaces and ensure that they're in it for the good reasons. I mean, I may be running the risk of romanticizing this because I know it's a difficult effort, where a regulator actually wants to try and assess, are you a player in whatever industry that you're in, deploying artificial intelligence in the proper way? And so we then begin having questions of data sovereignty, so on and so forth. Perhaps some may say that we are being a bit too guarded, saying, for instance, I mean, I think Kingsley gave a very good example. Niyi also may have touched on it earlier on, where we are saying that for you to be able to have to be a player in this particular sector, you must actually have a terrestrial data center in country. Let's just play out a little bit and sort of scope it by giving an example of what we're already experiencing in the market in the likes of SpaceX, for instance. Some sort of entity that is registered within the country doesn't have a lot of physical presence here, perhaps 2 or 3 members of staff in country, no terrestrial infrastructure whatsoever, save for the small unit that you buy and put on your roof, out on your garden, wherever you put it. Should you have an infraction with the service provider as a consumer, then you run to the regulator. In the Kenyan context, I'll give an example of the Communication Authority. There's very little that they can do in terms of enforcement because there's no terrestrial presence. There is no physical presence in terms of humans that you interact with within jurisdiction, so on and so forth. And so we then begin to have this difficult conversion of saying you must then have a data center here, or for the case of the Republic of Kenya, we are saying that if you're handling the data that concerns government data in the Republic of Kenya or citizen data in the Republic of Kenya, you cannot expatriate that data, and if you will, it's within very limited safeguards. So those are some of the technical challenges of trying to sift out bad actors in the full context of things. Deployment of artificial intelligence is in many industries across the world. Now, I mean, some degree of skepticism, of course, is very important because it then allows us to adopt as consumers, but also to deploy as service providers artificial intelligence in a very guarded way. The other challenge, of course, is on the critical question, which I think is one of the things that we will definitely have to deal with and grapple with for a very long time, and that is, the ethical element in deploying these technologies. Of course, issues such as cultural sensitivity, or where plain and simply there is lack of adequate data, but products already being deployed out there that we are consuming, those products may have an innate bias in them that perhaps was, for lack of a better word, not intentional, but simply for the fact that there was not enough data to go off of. I think as Niyi began, he spoke about, of course, the quality of data that is out there. But at times, it's not quite a case of the quality of data, but more a case of lack of that data. And I think when you talk about, say, for instance, genome questions, this then comes into perspective a lot better, because the African genome, for instance, is not as well documented as others that perhaps may be out there. So if you have products that perhaps exploit that to a great extent, then we instantly begin to see some of those challenges. And of course, on the question of ethical considerations, first of all, comes back again to the question of consent, very, very critical. And I think this is one of the things that as players will definitely be grappling with a lot more as we, participate and deploy this technology as an enabling technology in various industries. Consent is very critical. But then again, consent in and of itself can be a debilitating tool in the sense that without it, you cannot move. But then procuring it then becomes an extremely difficult endeavor, noting the fact that first of all, the population is extremely sensitized on some of these questions. And that sensitization is from a perspective of a lot of skepticism in terms of there is extreme bias and averseness to some of these technologies, in the sense that perhaps the information that ran out there initially, portrayed the solution as something that may cause harm than good. And so obtaining the consent then becomes a difficult question. But not some of this consent, we may be obtaining it before we subject it to automated decision making, where it's just going to ordinary, typical programming. All right. Before then, it goes onto an AI-based, sort of tool. And so where you're procuring the consent, somebody gives you very guarded consent. And in the Kenyan context, we have this very difficult problem of the regulator moving towards the direction of saying that consent must be on an opt-in structure. We're not giving someone an alternative for opting out. You're telling them you must, first of all, offer them a platform where they're opting into the service. And so they'll be with a toothpick running through your consent form and allowing you to interact with them only insofar as it touches on, for lack of a better word, regular programming, where they are sure that there'll be human interaction with these particular data sets. all right? But they're trying to improve the service and roll it out on an AI-enabled, structure, then you find the difficulty of transferring onto it, because the person can then say that I never consented for that. So I think those are some of the technical challenges that we'll of course have, and I chose to pick those two very deliberately. Bad actors, because it's a very big problem on both fronts. For us as service providers, because we want to be sure that those who are using our services are indeed using them for the right reason. Because I mean, if we don't hardwire that bias into the system, then we almost lose it at that particular front. But also for us as nation states, we need to think about this very critically, where we're asking ourselves, are we allowing the right players into these industries? Take an example of some of the most sensitive industries, such as the banking sector, which are the most highly regulated because of its net effect on the economy. So you want to be sure that those who are getting into the industry are getting into it for the right reasons. Those are the two facets of bad actors. And on the other front, ethical considerations at the top of it, I think, is a question of consent, but most importantly, the other issues such as community considerations. So I think, Tony, I'll leave it at that. At this point.
Thank you so much, Brian. Bad actors, ethical considerations. So Niyi would be taking over from here, and I think the next conversation, the next line of discussions would be around the overview of AI regulations. We have Kingsley, who is based in Nigeria, and I think Kingsley was a part of the team that contributed to the general AI strategy in Nigeria. And Brian is based in Kenya, and he has like an understanding of what the regulations in terms of the strategy is in Kenya. But before Niyi takes up the next line of conversation, we have a poll. We're asking everyone who's here. Yeah. First question. I told you we were going to have an interactive session. I've seen just one person in the chat. So the poll is on your screen now. How do you feel about AI handling your personal and biometric data? Everyone should just spend a few seconds answering this. Click on whether you're cautiously optimistic, whether you're concerned and skeptical, or whether you're fully on board, like, yes, thumbs up, go AI. We'd like to know what your thoughts are. And once you're done with this, the chat is open. Yes, the webinar chat room is open. Please introduce yourself, tell us what you do and where you're joining us from. I've seen one person. I would give the shout outs when we take the second poll. So thank you. How do you feel about AI handling your personal data and information? Yes, Niyi, you can continue with the next line of conversation and discussion.
Right, thanks so much, Anthony. So just as I just said, I think we'll be looking at the compliance and regulations, right, when it comes to AI. And I know a very key one that you've mentioned, Kingsley and Brian, is on data sovereignty, right, as it is, which is a very, very important subject matter for us to discuss. But I know this one is going to help you to sort of touch on it. So I'll say, what are the overviews, right? In a nutshell, the regulations that we have in Kenya, right? And Brian, that's for you. And Kingsley, in Nigeria, what are the regulations that we have that is guiding the use of AI, right? So any of you can start first.
Yeah, I think I can run through it very quickly first in terms of what does regulation look like currently in the Republic of Kenya. I think let me speak about the broad categories of regulators first of all. Of course, for the larger bit in terms of licensing, first of all, because I think that's the critical bit, and I think we need to discuss this for players in the industry to have perspective, because before you begin, there's a licensing question that of course lies with the Communication Authority, but of course there's a great extent of limitation in terms of what the Communication Authority will regulate. So of course, we expect perhaps some degree of change in that front already, because how the Communication Authority was structured here initially had focused to a great extent on media and telecommunications. And because now we understand that most of the large players in the world currently have a background in telecommunications, those who've run with the AI discussion world over. But then we're also finding, DNA tech firms that are not in telecommunications in any way other than perhaps device building, who are also in this particular space. So we expect definitely an element of improvement in terms of the regulatory bracket of the Communication Authority in Kenya to include some of these players, because of the very way that AI, of course, is currently structured in terms of data access, data storage, which is very big. Then, of course, from a consumer interaction perspective, The second and most important is the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, very, very active currently. And here, of course, we are discussing issues insofar as you're discussing PII, personal identifiable information, you definitely will be dealing with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. I think one of the most active regulators in the country currently, with a lot of interesting decisions over time. And I think they've helped to a great deal just to try and demystify where does the law stand on some of these questions. So it's very interesting to see how that plays out, because consent, I think we continue to insist on that, and we will continue to see that coming from that particular regulator. Then, of course, at the executive government level, then of course we have the Ministry of ICT, which sort of sets the base and the pace for how things then will run from that particular perspective, and that is supported under it by the ICT authority, but then also technocrats within that particular ministry. So the ICT authority is the custodian of the national ICT policy, and then of course the national AI strategy. As I mentioned when we began, we already have a bit of a clash between the national ICT policy and the national AI strategy, where I mean, I'll run through it once we get to that stage in terms of what does the national ICT policy sort of look like, strategy sort of look like for us, and what are some of those points of clashes. And the strategy, I think, did a good job in identifying challenges and gaps, but most importantly, where we can reap some benefit in deploying, this disruptive technology, as we like to call it, going into the future. So that is sort of a cursory look at what the regulatory environment looks like currently. Now, in terms of the tools for regulation, I think the various acts of parliament that deal with those particular regulators, the concern first and foremost is the Communication Act, a pretty old regulation, but I think has been reviewed over time, and it's current up to 2019, if I'm not mistaken. I'll need to rehash on that, with constant changes. Then, of course, the Data Protection Act, which requires all players who are handling data, in personal identifiable data, of course, in any way, to register in two classes as either controllers or processors or both. And from our experience, we've always found that registration often has to be taken out in both categories, because in one form or the other, you definitely find that controllers often, without a doubt, are processors. So that particular fault. Then, of course, we have the national ICT policy. This, of course, it's a guiding structure. It often will act to a great extent as a regulatory tool when you're dealing with government transactions. If you're handling any deal with the government or the Republic of Kenya, then it acts sort of as a regulatory tool. But in the private sector, it's sort of a guiding tool, because nonetheless, you will find yourself having to interact a little bit with some government element, even if in the private sector, right? From a standard AI perspective, we still do not have a targeted regulation that speaks strictly to AI, save for the fact that you then have to point to the other facets of regulation to then find a way of ensuring that you operate in a compliant environment. So you ensure that if you're contracting with government, you're compliant with the Communication Act. And then, of course, a very notorious piece of legislation that we have currently, the Computer and Cybercrimes Act, which then contains with it, sort of like broad generalizations of things that we could not find, say, in the penal code or other forms of regulation. So sort of titrating computer-related concerns that the government otherwise would have had. But then you'll not find yourself interacting with that a lot from an operational perspective, save for a point where a trouble then arises. So there's that front. But I think currently, with the way that AI has been rolled out, the principal regulator, I think, still remains the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, where there is the need to have an understanding of the fact that, first of all, how do you dissociate yourself from the strict requirement against automated decision making, on the other hand, while still being able to offer services in a revolutionary way and up to date sort of way of doing things. And I think we'll sort of find ourselves in a space where government will have to take this a bit more proactively, because government services in the country now are to a great extent automated. Of course, not AI level of automation, but in the sense that you can interact with a lot of government services from an e-platform. On the back end, there's still a lot of human interaction, but this more and more now is beginning to go away, where you entirely interact with the computer system and end-to-end So I think government itself, in the way that it is trying to sort of leading the conversation about changing what the regulatory stance is, so that we can actually proactively regulate the deployment of artificial intelligence, within the country. Now, with that, I'll just run very, very briefly through the national AI strategy and speak about its concerns. Why was this strategy sort of developed? And I think this will mirror what we already have in Nigeria nonetheless. And among the key things for us, I think, was one, the key concern not to have a great disruption on labor, human labor interactions, because there often has been this anxiety that once you roll over artificial intelligence, then you kick out the natural person in terms of interacting with the workplace. So just to give an example, I think we sort of are in a watershed moment, or in a great sense, where mechanization was coming in, and there was a lot of great concern that if we mechanize everything, then we'll kick out the human being from the traditional labor force. Then we moved away from mechanization, and then the next anxiety was on automation. That if we automate everything, then we're going to kick out the human being from the labor force. And I think those two incidents sort of give us an example of the fact that we can actually have a coexistence, because what we're looking for is efficiency, what we're looking for is cost effectiveness, what we're looking for is quality, timely service, which I think is the bottom line. And so now, as we're having the discussion on deployment of artificial intelligence in different facets of day-to-day interaction and day-to-day economic activity, the government, of course, is being very sensitive on ensuring that we have a system that allows for rolling out of these technologies, so that we're not left out of the larger global conversation, but ensuring that we do not, to a great extent, for lack of a better word, lead to job losses, because the strategy actually speaks about it in that plain sense, job losses, which I think is a very critical thing for government. So I think what we're expecting definitely is to see instances where government, of course, will be very, very key to see to it that it handholds players in the market to ensure that an enabling environment is given for players to be able to roll out AI-driven tools across different industries, but still ensuring that there is participation to a great extent of the human being in the job market. And then, of course, is the question of the digital divide and inclusive development. I think this more or less is an African problem more than a Kenyan problem, where we have a sector of the economy that is way ahead of the rest of the country, in the sense that those of us who are leading this conversation, I think all of us in this call currently, we sort of represent those of us at the forefront of this conversation. Then there's a larger bit of the population who are left out of it. And so the national AI strategy is cognizant of this fact and wants to ensure that all of us can be put in one basket and experience and benefit from this all in one soup. I think that's another very critical thing, and one of the most, I think, good elements in terms of the fact that government is aware of where its citizens is currently sitting. Then, of course, very, very important, I think this will cross-cut and be a lot similar to what we have in Nigeria, and that is the question of data sovereignty. Very, very critical. So it will be interesting to see how this is navigated. We may already have some snippets of it from the national ICT policy, what it says and speaks about data sovereignty. We had a very interesting incident in Kenya with our election in 2017, where a service provider had all the data housed in France. And so access became a very big problem, where the court was actually trying to adjudicate on the matter, but then access then became a problem because the service provider was saying that, first of all, this is our proprietary information. It's not the electoral management body's information, all right? Then on the other end is the question of the service provider must actually be available around the clock to provide this. I mean, time zone differences, if it's 8 a.m. in Nairobi court is 9 a.m. in Nairobi court is sitting, it's 4:30 in the morning in France. Nobody's going to be in an office to figure this out. And so those are some of the experiences that then mean that we then have to have a difficult conversation on how do we deploy it. And that, I think that's a very good example for those of us who may be in the space of creating AI tools for election management. Those are some of the things that you might be dealing with, and perhaps the federal government of Nigeria, or the national government of Nigeria, or the government of the Republic of Kenya will be telling you that for you to provide services in that particular sector, you must host and consume all of your services with terrestrial service providers, a data center physically present with the racks in a data center in Nairobi, wherever it will be, or in Lagos, or wherever it will be. So those are some of the challenges, I think. And then lastly, so that I can allow more comments from the other front, of course, is the anxiety of regulatory preparedness. There is the recognition that perhaps as regulators, they may be a little bit behind in terms of playing this particular sector. And the joy of this is the fact that a lot of private sector players were invited to be part of the conversation in terms of developing the national AI strategy. So we definitely expect that. We definitely hope, not expect, I think we hope the fact that there'll be a lot of involvement also in terms of legislation, so that players can actually give input, because I think accessing data center services within the Republic of Kenya is quite expensive. And so many people will be hosting this with service providers from outside the Republic who offer service at a lower rate. But then the challenge with that again then becomes, are we gonna allow government data, say for instance, to be hosted with this extra, I think there's a name for it that I'm forgetting, where we have players who almost sit on top of government. These are players who offer tech services across regions, almost becoming sort of the standard model for accessing these services. And so they almost have a stronger bargaining chip as against government. And government, in fact, uses these services. So those are some of the interesting things that we've seen in the regulatory environment, Niyi. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Brian. So that's like there's a lot when it comes to what Kenya is doing. So let's hear from Kingsley from the Nigerian angle. And it's not a competition, so we're not going to say which country is winning, right? As it is. But
No, after hearing everything Brian said, I wonder what is left for me to say. What is left?
So let's see. So Kingsley, you can take the mic.
Thank you so much, Niyi, and
just to give you some
thank you so much, Niyi, and also thank you.
If Nigeria has 17 data centers, you're already winning.
Well, let's see. Kingsley, convince us.
Thank you, Brian, for that elaborate explanation of what's going on in Kenya. And yeah, am I thinking about where to start from with Nigeria? Yeah, so work have been going on also in Nigeria. Just to have a bit of correction of what Tony said. I was part of the team that worked on the former AI policy, before the AI strategy. So as an insider from the AI policy, when it was written, I also try to look at it and use that eyes to look at the current AI strategy, and I find it really, really interesting because before the AI strategy, let's look at the beginning of AI in Nigeria. I mean, the beginning of AI regulation, and I find that first rooted in the NDPR, the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, that's first started about 2017 thereabouts, and yeah, started with the regulation of protection of personal data, allowing that there should be consent before the processing of data, and then we now move to the Data Protection Act that came up in 2023, and I find it really interesting because looking at it from most people have argued that Nigeria does not have AI regulation, but I look at it from Section 37 of the Nigerian Data Protection Act that provides for automated decision making, and for me, it's just trying to say that hey, if there are restrictions for the use of artificial intelligence in the in automating personal data. So irrespective of the sector, either in the banking, the health, the finance, health, energy, whatever you're doing, you must, there must be proper consent when you are automating or you are processing the decision, the data of people in an automated manner. And also, if you look at the Data Protection Regulation, Data Protection Act, it also provides for a commission, Nigerian Data Protection Commission. And if you're in Nigeria, you'll see that the commission is doing a lot of work. Dr. Vincent Olatunji is doing a lot of work. In fact, recently, Meta was fined. And if you look at several issues, several cases now that are coming up, I think one even happened very close to me. A friend of mine, a lawyer friend, that filed a matter for one of our friends that a bank having a personal data, use that data to open another bank account, and I think the court fined the bank about 4 million naira, 5 million naira for that. So there has been a lot of interesting cases happening in Nigeria, and I think another one happened. There was a judgment last week for Jumia and a particular affiliate company where a particular person ordered, I think it's Domino Pizza. Personally ordered pizza from Jumia, and then Jumia shared with Domino's, and then they continued giving the person emails, and then it was sued, and the court actually ruled in favor of the data subjects. All these things are showing that the country is really serious about the protection of personal data, irrespective of where it's being used. And now, aside from this, cross-sectorally, there are regulations that have been in place too. For instance, we have the Cyber Crimes Act that have always prevented against cyber fraud, irrespective of whatever you used, either AI or no AI. As far as those fraud are done anonymously, are done online, there are regulations against it. And somebody made mention about a particular challenge that we are having, and which I feel that the government is working on, freedom of expression. And the person said the challenge we're having now is not just freedom of expression, but it is freedom of anonymous expression, where people are making expression and don't even know who they are. And these are really heightened these days, with the use of AI technologies. Let's move into the national AI strategy. Currently in the draft process. The national AI strategy have several pillars, but one of the key things you would see is that the national AI strategy was not drafted in isolation. It was drafted, in view of the NIST, National Institute of Standard and Technology, that is NIST framework, NIST framework in the US, the SDG, United Nations SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, and also the UNESCO AI recommendation, UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics. And the strategy has several pillars among many other, and I see that it has three major focus. And the first is on the economic growth and competitiveness. The second is on the social development and inclusion. And then the third is on the technology advancement and leadership. So if you look at the totality of what the strategy is talking about, is how do we put Nigeria at the forefront of AI development in the world, in Africa and in the world? And also, how do we ensure that the risk that this AI system poses are being reduced? And part of the ways that the strategy plan to tackle this is proposing having what they call a high-level AI ethics commission, or an high-level expert-led AI ethics commission. And the commission, unlike we have the Data Protection Regulation Commission, Data Protection Commission, would help to handle issues relating to risk that are coming from the use of artificial intelligence, and to ensure that businesses are safeguarded, persons are safeguarded when artificial intelligence is being used. Aside from the risk and the safeguard of artificial intelligence from the National AI Strategy, we also see questions on skills and the emphasis on youth skill competitiveness and development. Providing scholarship grants for youths, to be skilled, to develop skills in artificial intelligence. I also see issues discussed on infrastructure. Building, having good infrastructure. Although I'm still trying to look at balancing the argument of national strategy with the economic realities of Nigeria. And first on infrastructure, because AI development use a lot of GPUs, and GPUs are run on electricity, right? And I look at it from the Nigerian perspective. How many times we've had power grid collapse in the year? And I look at it because these things are really consuming a lot of power. So how do we balance the economic competitiveness of having infrastructure in the country, in face of the reality of the electricity? Aside that, the strategy is focused on how can the Nigerian economy be developed? How can AI be used to develop the Nigerian economy? But the few things I see, in the artificial intelligence, I think, is part of my comment, is that just like a general law, when you have a law and you do not have enforcement mechanisms, you do not have sanction, that might be difficult for compliance, right? And which would mean that on the face level, it might just be some bit of suggestive and advising that, okay, why not go this way? Why not go that way? Why not go this way? How do we enforce it? We don't know. How do we ensure compliance? We don't know. How do we ensure that? How do we know that we are closer to our goals? It's also a bit of anonymous, But that's just my comment on the trend of artificial intelligence starting from 2017 down to 2025 that we are right now. Also to mention, some sectors are also coming up with policies, to also to help, manage use of artificial intelligence. I know that the finance sector are doing a lot of work releasing policies, restricting the use of automation, of artificial intelligence or personal data in financial transactions. Yeah, but I know that this is just gradual. In the coming days, there will also be more policies that are coming, not just delegating everything to the NITDA, National Information and Technology Agency, or leaving it to the Commissioner for the Information and Digital Economy. I believe that it's something that is growing gradually. I believe that we'll begin to see more updates.
All right, thank you so much, Kingsley. I know Nigeria is also trying so hard, right, to ensure that things are working really, really fine. Let's quickly move on to the ethical framework, right, and how this is balancing innovation, right, and regulation, as it is, because something happened in Nigeria back then, and I think it brought about this quote, or it validates this quote that regulation will always be chasing after innovation, right, as it is. And a typical example is the era of cryptocurrency, right? And we see how that particular innovation was actually handled. But I think if you look at the AI, is a bit different, right, as it is. So in terms of that ethical framework, and how is the regulation balancing in innovation, what are your thoughts, right? And what are your country, right, Brian, what's Kenya doing regarding that? Kingsley, what's Nigeria doing on that front? Yeah.
So I mean, I'll run through that from the perspective of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, and the bottom line still remains consent. Very critical. I think the easiest way of putting it is consent. So as a service provider, and so long as you have squared that, the Republic of Kenya should be in good standing. Of course, we're still waiting to see if there'll be any improvement in law, regulation, or policy. Well, policy already we're seeing some action in that particular front, but at least in regulation and law, whether perhaps there'll be any requirements in the time to come on a higher threshold of interaction between service providers and consumers of services. But as it stands now, in so long as you're processing personal data, which I think is now the gold standard everywhere, in so long as you have an opt-in structure for consent, you should be in a good place. So if there's a clear understanding from the consumer that the service that they're using is an AI-based tool, it will be storing their data beyond perhaps the use case for it. It will be used to train a model. Then you should be in good standing. And I think, plain and simply put, I think that is where we currently sit from a regulatory perspective. The only challenge with it remains how to procure this consent, because we're still having a lot of varied opinions, varied takes on this particular question, different views on it, as to whether or not you can do a blanket set of consent requirements if you're doing storage beyond the purpose, the purpose for the data was collected. There's an understanding for this. So I think there'll be the need to strike a balance between the need to allow development and improvement of this disruptive technology, because I think there are a lot of gains that we can definitely get from it, vis-a-vis ensuring that as consumers we operate in a secure environment. And if you extrapolate this and play it out from the perspective of, say, for instance, financial services, health services, then you begin to understand the need to have a tightly regulated environment, right? Because oftentimes those are the very first front where we have advanced interactions with tools across the market, because the net effect of it then is instant loss of some nature, largely in the financial services sector. So of course we need to tread that particular front of industry development very carefully, and in fact allowing regulators to do their part. Now the thing that of course you also wait to watch is whether or not industry regulators away from tech industry regulators will want to have a play in this. Say for instance in Kenya right now, for you to operate within digital lending services, the central bank has an expanded mandate to be able to regulate players in that particular sector, right? So you find yourself in a heavy regulated sector from a tech perspective, with, say, the data protection regulation, communication regulation, but then you find yourself with a lot more stringent regulation from the perspective of financial services regulators. So that's another thing that I think we want to continue to keenly watch, because it is yet to crystallize. There are conversations ongoing as to whether or not this will be housed at your principal regulator or a general regulator. Because if you have a financial services player, then where do they then fall in the full spectrum of things? So I think those are some of my preliminary remarks on that particular question. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Kingsley. Brian, Kingsley, let's have your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I feel that when it comes to ethics in Nigeria, it's something. Ethics generally is something that is really growing, and people have oftentimes made comments that ethics are toothless bulldog. They are just there to scream at you and they have nothing on you. and I think that regulators are making it a bit, making it seems real now, because if you look at the foundation of ethics, ethics is founded on transparency, fairness, transparency, fairness, explainability, privacy, inclusivity, and others. But in the pyramid, that there are principles that that are priority. For instance, privacy. And starting from that, Nigeria is doing a lot of work on privacy, as I've mentioned earlier, and the fact that a lot of fines are coming up these days, I feel it makes a lot of sense. And aside that, just as Brian mentioned, we have sector-specific regulators, and they have their requirements when it comes to the use of AI in their specific domain or terrain. Why I'm unable to, I cannot speak broadly on specific sector, but I could just speak more on the technology area. And I see that the effort Nigeria is making now is to ensure that the country is becoming AI developed, right? And you could really see it from a lot of initiatives that are coming from the federal government. For instance, first sponsoring the national AI strategy is a way to really show that the government is really interested in innovation. And looking at the core pillars and the principles at which the national AI strategy is founded on is also an indication. For instance, the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics is showing that we are really interested in AI ethics. And also looking at 3MIT, that the government is also doing a lot of funding, training people on the development of AI. So the government actually wants that there is improvement in the technology terrain of Nigeria, but what I am not too sure about is what is being done to ensure by the balance of this innovation and also how ethical it is, because the data protection actually have there's limitations to what the data protection can actually do, and that is if it as it relates to protection of personal data, unlike it is in other countries, probably in the US, where you can have bodies regulating credit scoring, right? In Nigeria, I'm not too sure about if there's any specific body dedicated for credit scoring, where there are also anti-discriminatory laws, in other places. Nigeria, I'm not sure we have a specific law for anti-discrimination. We have the constitution, we have the criminal code, we have the penal code, but, anti-discrimination, and so anti-discrimination when it comes to now, discrimination, AI-enabled or AI-facilitated discrimination, you could now, make the anti-discriminatory law probably to expand it to fit into such work. But for expandability, I feel that the data protection regulation covers largely expandability, where expandability and transparency, where you must tell people what their data is being used for. As far as we are processing data, you must let us know what is your plan, how are you collecting it, how are you storing it, how are you using it. And it also includes whether data in rest or data in transit. And you would see, that special section of the regulation that talks about cross-border data flow. And that, part of the regulations or part of the requirements of the cross-border data flow is that if you are transporting any data beyond the borders of Nigeria, you must be sure that the country at which that border is flowing to must have equivalent law. Must have, so there's some sort of reciprocity. That means the country has, an equivalent law that promotes or that allows for cross-border, so that when this, so that whenever whatever happens to this data, you could actually hold the country, responsible for how those data is used. So these are the efforts I feel. For the aspect of inclusion, I'm not too sure what is currently going on in inclusion. I know that the rate of penetration is really getting better, by reports. At the telecommunication report we are receiving, the Airtel, the MTN, the Glo, giving report that internet penetration has grown by 10% this year, had grown by 15% this year. It shows that people are really getting included. But still, I think when I checked it yesterday, for mobile phone, I think we have about 80% of penetration for mobile phone currently in Nigeria, which sounds like a good one, because how can you use an AI system when you don't have a mobile phone? I think it starts from there. So inclusion, but discrimination, fairness metrics, I am not too sure if there are work going on or if they are work amplified. It can be going on, but not too amplified. So balancing it is just to ensure that when policies are coming up, yeah, it's good to regulate, but over-regulation could just be a turn-off. So it should just be very, very calm, and also being solved such a way that it could encourage startups to really grow and thrive in the country.
All right, thanks so much, Kingsley. Sounds like there's a lot more to be done by regulators when it comes to AI and other, I'll call them emerging technologies, because it's not only AI, but we know AI is the one that is currently reigning. But there are a lot of things around IoT as well, in Internet of Things, robotics and stuff like that, which I think the part of the world where we are, those things still looks like I'll call them fiction movies, right? As it is, but eventually we'll get there. Anthony, let's quickly take the poll, right, and then we can move quickly to the next session.
Yes, the poll is up. Yes, make a choice. How would you feel if AI created a digital clone of your identity that could think, talk, and act like you? Jeez. Okay. Should be very cautious, interesting to see, or uncomfortable. What exactly is your response? And the last poll that we had, right? What the numbers are. How do you feel about AI handling personal biometric data? So 54% of the persons who voted, everyone here said, oh, they're cautiously optimistic. 46% were concerned and skeptical, and 8%, only 8% were fully on board. Like, let's go AI. So yes, what do you think about this? If AI created a digital clone of your ID that could think, talk, do everything like you. Thank you. I would share with you the what the stats are in a bit. So we have just one more poll, and we'll leave that to like the last. Once we're done with the questions, we take that and then wrap up with some general general thoughts.
All right, thanks so much, Anthony. So I'll just say, our speakers, thank you so far for the job done, and I hope the audience are picking one or two things as it is that you can actually take back to your work and see how you can implement, right? If you have to implement something, if you have to learn more, happy to connect with Brian, from anyone joining from Kenya, and then Kingsley is also available on LinkedIn, right? You can connect with them to sort of learn more. The next chapter is basically on privacy security, right? And I think we'll talk more about ethical risk, but let's stay on the privacy security. And right now, we know that we are all on a daily basis consuming what I'll call a digital service, right? As it is, you have your smartphone, you're always opening something, right, on your smartphone. So let's talk about AI-driven fraud, right? And how is AI, right, helping, right, in combating this whole fraud over thing, right? As it is. For those who are in the financial sector, there's always, and there will continuously be stuffs and recommendations from FATF, right, and some other international bodies on AML, right, money laundering, countering terrorist financing, and also proliferation of finance, right, and we see how, in quote, these fraudsters are also leveraging AI, right? I know someone mentioned stuff around deepfake, which will also get there. So what are your thoughts on AI-driven fraud, right? And what are the preventions, right, that at least you've seen out there, okay? And how can people also identify when there's a potential fraud, right, that's about to happen? So, Kingsley, maybe I'm going to put you first on this, all right?
Okay, so AI-driven fraud. You see, fraud is something that's been long before now. Starting from the days of 419 to pickpockets and honestly, if you have been in Nigeria for a while now, you will know that a lot of schemes have happened in Nigeria, starting from the MMM, so starting from the Wonder Bank back in those days, to the MMM, to several coins, shit coins, several scam projects, So, and the aim of these things, actually, the aim of these actors is to act as real, to get your attention and take from you. Most of them, they appear so real that you don't even know when you are giving them your all. So now, with the advent of artificial intelligence, it's even serious now, because many companies are now coming with the deception of, we are building an AI project, we are building an AI tool, we are building an AI this, and we're building an AI that. But there's this quote that says that whenever you use any service or any product for free, then just know that you are the product. So you are using a product and you think that, this product is free. You're getting your personal data, your name, your address, it's getting your IP address, having access to your browsing history, having access to your activities on your phone. So all those things are they are things that are sold in the black market. In the black market, I think, was it the Minister of Bosun Tijani that posted on LinkedIn sometimes last year, that he was talking about how people have compromised, how Nigerian data has been sold in the black market, that he even bought his own data, his own ID for 20 naira. It contains his name, his NIN, his house address, everything. So they bought it for 20 naira, 20 naira, 15 naira. So AI-driven fraud is something that is real, and there are several things that could cause it, that could make AI, enhance it. Starting from sophisticated softwares now that are collecting biometrics, collecting facial recognition, collecting, most of them would even request for your voice, most request for your password, and all this collection is that once you are not careful with the way you give your data, I know that most times it can really be stressful for you to read privacy policy of a particular app, because apps can have dozens of pages of privacy policy that just be like, oh, please, I accept. And because most times also there is no alternatives, you just have to, you need that app. So whatever it is that the privacy policy, just click on accept and move on. And this has really have caused the data of people being compromised. But I know that there are a lot of regulation. I refer now to fraud specifically. There are a lot of regulations that CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, is making to ensure that there are fraud prevention techniques. And also I know banks internally are also making such moves. For instance, they will tell you that there must be KYC, which will include your biometric, your face. In fact, you just cannot get access to an app like that. And some banks either use an automated means for fraud detection, or they put some sort of human in the loop, such that if you try a password 2 or 3 times, then your app is off. You have to go to the customer care in the bank to get it sorted out. So all these things are techniques that the banks are putting in place to ensure that the fraud are reduced. And why am I referring to the financial sector? Because financial sector is very volatile, and it's something that concerns every single person in Nigeria. I mean, you need money to continue your life. So there are several. In fact, when you are going for your licensing, you have to ensure that you are complying with a whole lot of things as a financial institution before you are granted the license. And there are regulatory, there are mechanisms that are ensuring that you are compliant. In fact, I know that when it comes to best in finding, I give it to CBN. They are good at finding. Once they detect that you are not complying, probably you're supposed to send a report, you're supposed to send, and you don't do, you are getting fined immediately. And I think I love that, because it really keeps people on their toes to ensure that they are complying with fraud. Because there is a particular fraud that happened, I think one of the largest companies in the US, Equifax. I mean, this happened sometimes 10 years ago until today. Till today, they are still, it's a big fraud. We can check it out, Equifax. They are still compensating those that were victim of the fraud, and they are paying it in badge. Just imagine, it's taking 10 years to pay for the dividend of a fraud scheme, to show you how massive it is. So fraud can really be there. It can really be terrible, can really be terrible, be an economic burden, on institutions. So it is better that you actually comply than to actually face, the heat of the fraud itself. And AI, honestly, is really heightening it. And most times, actually, and this is like my last comment, most times data are not stolen from the bank, but there are data points that actually fraudsters can use to get a person. data points such that probably you bought something online, you filled your house address, you bought somewhere in another site, you put your phone number, you bought somewhere else, probably while registering for an app, you put your face recognition, you bought it somewhere again, you put your thumbprint, your fingerprint, your biometric. So all these data points can actually be combined together to actually get a data subject. And that's why it's really important that, when you're imputing all those things, you be careful of be careful of your data footprints. Either using apps, using websites, using all those things. Be careful, because all those things can be put together to be able to clone you and have access to, very important database, of your life. So I'll take a chill from here.
Right, thanks. Brian, take the mic.
Thank you. I mean, well said, Kingsley. I think perhaps just to add more than give any more contributions, because I think that really puts it in perspective, is to sort of encourage players within different industries to participate very strongly in bridging the digital divide. And the point here is, so I mean, Kingsley did mention earlier on that about mobile phone connectivity, if I'm not mistaken, is at about 80% penetration across the population. Now, if you look at that and we narrow it down to smartphone connectivity out of that number, then of course it reduces. And then of course, if you go further to stable internet connectivity, that reduces further. And you get to a point where as your band of consumers, their degree or quality of savviness, becomes narrower and narrower as you sort of sift them across. And when you have a less savvy population that is accessing a service, then you're exposing them to they are likely to be exposed to a greater degree of risk. Of course, that also can be looked at in a different way, in the sense that if somebody has network connectivity and availability, say for instance, typical mobile connection purely without being on an internet structure, then they may not be able to have such a large digital footprint on the one hand. But then it means as they get onto these platforms, they may be a bit too naive in the structure of it. I think among the critical things that players in markets ought to do on the question of fraud with AI, I think I choose to look at it perhaps from that particular perspective, not fraud in AI, but fraud with AI, is to have a savvy population more than anything else, because then that way you ensure that there's a lesser, people are sort of up to date on what is new, what is happening, how are things changing. Now, so that of course calls upon us first and foremost to ensure that among the sort of add-ons that we give to the society away from our clientele is ensuring that we go out there and preach and give an indication of things are being done differently. The world is changing, the space is changing, so that we can deal with a much more savvy player out there. Of course, as we began lastly for me, is we spoke about bad actors, and this we just look at it from two fronts. The one front, of course, is as a service provider being able to sift away from your systems people who you identify as bad actors. On the other front is regulators being able to get out of the market those who get into the industry or the trade with the wrong intentions, for lack of a better word. Now, the first front, of course, is the most critical, because within those very structures, when you identify bad actors, then you're able to instantly, make a better environment where people are able to interact with these services at a very, very safe, level, for lack of a better word. And then, of course, the other front, of course, falls onto the regulator. But then, again, to sort of say this, as we experience some of this, the elements of fraud in it, become a bit more apparent. And if you think about it, I think Niyi had mentioned earlier on the question of the Internet of Things. You perhaps may be on a device that you're using a tool that is AI enabled, but in the full structure of different devices sharing information in between themselves most of us here will be, on all manner of devices doing for us all manner of things all at the same time, right? And so as Kingsley was giving the example, the amount of data information, our digital footprint out there today for someone who's tech savvy is extremely wide and broad. On the very same device that you're logging onto TikTok, for lack of a better example, is the very same device that you're logging onto your banking app for the purpose of approving transaction at your place of work. And so you then immediately begin to understand the need for security. So I think that goes to the third point, which is very critical in terms of just, first of all, beyond the service, first of all, we must be able to discuss device security first. At the very base of it, device security is where it begins. Of course, that is with the understanding that at times penetration goes beyond device security. At times, and so long as you are on a system of some sort, could be AI based, just traditional programming, you are exposed. But when we get into device security, I think to a great extent already we have some element of protection. So I think this all boils back down to a savvy user of these particular services. I mean, you'll be surprised how many of us fall victim of the spam emails at work, and people still click on this thing, the phishing emails, regardless of how long we've spoken about this from 1985 when emails were developed. People still click on phishing emails. So I don't think that we get to a point where truly we are able to exist in a protected environment. But it's what we have to deal with. But we have the benefit now, and I think the conversations that we're having today form part of what will give us an advantage, in the sense that as we are adopting these technologies, artificial intelligence for as a matter of fact, we are leading ourselves by asking ourselves, where will this go? How will it look like for us? And so when we leave this conversation, we are a bit more equipped. As we're engaging regulators, we're able to indulge them a bit more and tell them, I think you should steer policy and regulation this way, because for us, among the biggest things, of course, is fraud with artificial intelligence. That we need to caution ourselves. And of course, people are focusing on training these large language models. Of course, the tech has gotten a lot better. We are moving away from large language models and specifically trained models, so on and so forth. But forming a bit more of these conversations that we can have savvy users, I think, will take us a really long way. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Brian and Kingsley, for that contribution. I know that one of the hard work that the Prembly is doing, right, is to ensure that firstly, people's identity can be easily verified, and there are a lot of products that the Prembly has touching different aspects, right, when it comes to compliance, fraud prevention, identity verification as well, making sure that your data as a user is also safe, right, and is actually processed properly. That being said, I know we are some time past the allocated time for this. For that reason, I'll just pass it on to Anthony. Anthony, please, let's take the last poll, and then we can wrap up.
Okay. Thank you so much, Niyi. Thank you. It's been a really insightful conversation, really, really insightful, really engaging too. And thanks to everyone who's been engaging. Let's have the stats from the last poll. So how would you feel if AI created a digital clone of your identity that could think, talk, and act like you? Well, 31% were very cautious. I said they'll be very cautious of it. 31% interesting to see. They would want to see what it looks like first. And then 46% were uncomfortable. Wow. Wow. Okay, so we're going to have the next poll, and it's going to be showing on your screen right about now. If AI had access to all your personal data, what would worry you the most? Wow. Okay, we've just had like a long conversation about personal data, privacy, and all of those things. What would worry me the most? Okay, share your thoughts in the you can type. Actually, this is not a yes or no answer, so just type. So while we're still typing in the poll, we'll have one of the panelists respond to the question. The question is from Halima Omidiron. Do we have any laws governing AI cloning? That's the first question. And the second, I think we have 2 or 3 more questions. That's the first question, right? So we can have one person respond to that. Another question, this is from Moses. In balancing the risks associated with data anonymity and ownership of persons' digital rights, especially minorities, there have been calls for communal identity frameworks. What are your views on how feasible this might be? There are 2 more, but I would like either Kingsley or Brian to attempt the questions, and then we'll share the other 2.
Yeah, I think I can take Halima's question there very quickly. Do we have any laws governing AI cloning? I'm not sure if this is a context question, whether it's in Kenya or Nigeria, because I think this will be jurisdiction based. Sorry, my camera was off there. At least my voice could be heard. Yeah, so I mean, in Kenya for a fact, no, plain and simple, but perhaps we can impute different bits of legislation and looking at this from a prosecutor's perspective would be a way to get an answer, in the sense that they may want to stretch perhaps the Computer Misuse, the Computer and Cyber Crimes Act in Kenya to perhaps find something to sustain a charge, and on account of which then you could be saying that in so long as you can draw a nexus between the activity of AI cloning and direct loss to an individual, in this case being a subject, then perhaps you could say in a sense remotely, yes, we do have some regulation or law governing AI cloning, but explicitly in Kenya, I can say for a fact, no. And these are some of the things that as we were saying earlier on, we'll then find ourselves in a space where different sets of legislation may have to be read together to sort of give sense to one thing. Because I think this is, for lack of a better term, I choose to look at it from a risk perspective, where AI cloning for a fact then becomes a problem in the sense that you have different data sets from across different platforms and tools that, if then put together, then give and mimic my presence on the interweb, and can act, behave, and operate like me. I think perhaps Kingsley, you want to take the other question?
So my thoughts about community work on data cloning, community work on minority. The thing is, all the data protection frameworks that we have addresses individuals and not community. So whether you are, and it can be a bit challenging, because you would now start thinking about indigenous data and sovereignty and the likes. But there are a lot of issues that would proceed out of this if you actually want to look at community. Although community can help for the purpose of identification and verification, for the purpose of correcting biases that could come up from the wrong use of data. But at the same time, when we want to focus on communities, there might be issues on there are issues on we're trying to duplicate laws. So how do we say in the particular countries we have two frameworks, one focusing on indigenous or minority communities and another focusing on every other person? And the other part I try to understand is, how do we define community? So what are exactly the way we could define community in this instance? Because that would be very, very difficult to define. And then we have to go through a lot of jurisprudential journey to be able to consider, I think that's happened when we first started defining who is a person. And then we went forward to define natural person, artificial person. Now we now start defining community. So I feel that it's really good for the purpose of proper identification and verification system, having like a local, the same way we had like customary law to help verify some things that the law could not verify, customary marriages, customary blah blah blah. You need to bring like an expert to give testimony, expert witness to talk about, okay, this is it in our culture, this is how we do it here. So if you are going through that route, then we'll now start having some sort of dictatorship and some autocratic work, where some communities begin to do things that are not even consistent with the law. And the argument to be that this is what our community takes and this is what works for us. So it has the pro, it has the con, but I think the disadvantage outweigh the advantage.
But then Niyi and Brian can also speak to the next two questions. If AI systems make decisions, who is accountable when those systems get it wrong? I think this is much more Brian than Niyi. And then the second question is most likely for Niyi. With digital ID and clones, who now owns our identities? Is it us individuals, the platform owner, or the AI algorithms? Most likely much more Brian too than Niyi. So probably Brian, in 1-2 minutes, you want to speak to this?
Yep. I think those I can wrap up very quickly. I'll give it an attempt. Of course, at the end of the day, liability boils back down to an actor that has legal capacity. And actors that have legal capacity in the face of the law, of course, are natural persons, and then, of course, juristic persons. Juristic persons, in this sense, we are discussing corporations in whatever shape or form, depending on jurisdiction. So in Kenya and Nigeria, common law countries, of course, we will have partnerships, companies, limited LLCs, what do you call limited liability companies, or limited in another shape or form, in so long as they can act in their own name, shape, or form. And then, of course, behind that, we know that the law of corporation protects us by having a natural person at the back end. Should we not be able to get a hold, should liability not rest at the individual level? So yes, for your comfort, in the event of any fraud or bad action within the construct of artificial intelligence, liability falls onto the natural person. On the question of cloning, still again, this boils back down to the natural person. The risk, of course, may be borne by you, but as long as you can demonstrate that the action was not attributable to you as an individual, then of course you have security there. Yeah, I tried.
Yes. Niyi, is back to you. Thank you so much to everyone that has joined, everyone who's participated, and I would leave the speakers to Niyi to say thank you and do the just share final thoughts and thank yous to everyone.
Well, thanks so much, Anthony, and thank you to Brian and Kingsley for doing justice to this particular subject matter. I know it's something that's not going to stop here. It's a continuous conversation until we're able to have at least what I'll call a standard policy, governing AI, and that is also fostering innovation or supporting innovation as it is, because we know that AI is here to stay. all of us, one way or the other, we're contributing, right? Either as an innovator or as a consumer. And we also need to be very, very cautious, right, and careful on how we consume AI. And for those of us who are innovators, I think the ethics is very, very important, right? Especially around everything that's been discussed. This is not going to stop, as I've mentioned. There might possibly be another webinar, right? That we're going to look into another aspect of AI, right? And we'll always be an evangelist to ensure that anywhere we go and either as we're creating or as we're consuming, we ensure that we are doing it in the right way, right? Very, very important. And on behalf of the management of Prembly, I want to say thank you to everyone who has joined this webinar. And we wish you a very, very great evening. For those that are in the evening time, those in the afternoon, please enjoy your afternoon. And for those who are still in the morning, please enjoy the rest of your day and see you again. All right. Thank you so much, Anthony, for always being here. And we look forward to another episode coming soon. Cheers,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you, Brian, Kingsley, Niyi. Thank you to whoever was behind ensuring things happen too. At Prembly. Thank you so much. We'll see the next session